Einsamkeit, number 12, the originally planned final song of Winterreise. And the original key of the song is D minor. I think it's a little bit out of fashion for musicologists or musical thinkers to be really giving too much importance to this kind of stuff, but it is worth being noted that as a Viennese composer in the 1820s, D minor is a pretty important key, considering Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, for instance, or Mozart's Requiem in D minor. So there's definitely an air of finality to D minor. So at least in the received tradition, there is definitely a curated air of finality and death in D minor. But in Einsamkeit, there's absolutely nothing to say that he dies. It's just, that's the current lighting in the room. In the middle key setting, Rast and Einsamkeit are in the same tonality. And the left hand, in the top of the fifth, is an F sharp. And then in the third measure, it transitions from F sharp to a G. And I think that's just a nice detail because, right, from Rast, it's the opening of the melody from Rast. And that is 100% verified when we have Wie eine trübe Wolke durch heitere Lüfte geht, where the melody is the same thing. And let's look back. Previously, he has compared himself to a raging stream that is frozen on the surface, to a spinning weather vane. Later on, he's going to compare himself to storm clouds, but in Einsamkeit, he compares himself to this mattes Lüftchen. So that's where I think that idea of horizon and ostinato basses really create this overarching vibe, for lack of a better word. Another interesting point of comparison with Rast is the opening of Rast has these second beat accents. Where in Einsamkeit, we also have second beat accents in the introduction, here, but later on in the song we have a lot of first beat accents. So you can think about it again as this alternation between iambs and trochees in the rhythm of the poetry, but to be sure, in Einsamkeit it's almost entirely iambic. Nevertheless, we do have some first beat accents. So zieh ich meine Straßen. Every step forward that he's making is increasingly difficult for him, where he's complaining about how peaceful the air is and how full of light the world is. And this is painful to him. Why is it painful? Why is such a banal, even pleasant thing painful? Because at least when it was storming outside, he was less aware of how wretched he is inside. And that's the end of Winterreise, at least in its first form. Accompanied to the sound of a little bit of Neapolitan, there's nothing about death. It's a deterioration of an individual's life force. As crazy as it is to say, I actually think Leiermann is a more hopeful ending than Einsamkeit, because at least in Leiermann there's somebody else in the picture. In Einsamkeit, he's just alone in the desert, alone under some dead tree, not himself dead. And that's the whole problem. Yeah, he's face to face with how deteriorated he sees himself. In Leiermann, this feeling of deterioration steeps for another 11 songs before we get to the true end of Winterreise. And it steeps for so long that he actually has the courage to speak to this Leiermann, and he actually has some sort of communion with him. But in the key of Beethoven's Last Symphony and Mozart's Requiem, the original Winterreise, as Schubert wrote these 12 songs, ends in a much more bleak fashion than it ends when Schubert himself was knowingly closer to his own death. And if there's one thing I can say about Winterreise that I make all these 24 videos out of, is that Winterreise is not about death. Winterreise is about life. In Jean-Paul Sartre, huis clos, this infernal stuckness of being alive. Death is not an option. Death is a simple solution that doesn't solve your problems in Winterreise. He faces death, and then he decides he has to go on for a few more songs. And the final act of Winterreise is communion with another person. In wretchedness, but still communion. And so somehow he sees past death at the end of Winterreise and sees life. The quality of that life is another question. But the subject and the real kernel of Winterreise is life and all of its problems. That's, for me, what Winterreise is about.